My fiance Alana and I have been living in an apartment that we kind of love for the last 4 years now. It's modern, it's central, it's convenient to get just about anywhere that we need to go. The windows and the views are amazing. We often kind of just like stand in front of them in silent awe of what we get to look out and see every day. And there's a gym in the building, there's a convenience store in the building, and whenever something breaks, we submit a request online rather than making 3 separate trips to Home Depot to fix a single towel rack. However, there are definitely a few things that we miss, right? We park outside in the Canadian winters, which means if we're all of a sudden in a rush or we forget to use the command starts, we're immediately thrust into Arctic survival mode. A heated garage would be nice. In addition, there's no green space, there's no balcony or nature surrounding us at all. And so there's very limited access to that tranquility of nature. And most of the sounds we hear throughout the day are not wind in the trees or birds chirping, it's sirens, police cars, and just general traffic. And so it would be nice to have maybe a forest in the backyard, a body of water, The problem is the housing market is kind of dumb these days. As a 29-year-old getting married this year, I check the real estate listings every single Monday. But in Canada, for all the things that we want, let's say proximity to downtown, green space, a body of water nearby, a heated garage, we're looking at $1 million minimum. Now, this is hard on a lot of people because I think that most young adults feel that the purchase of their own property is like a rite of passage into maturity. They feel like it's an itch that they need to scratch before being a confident, independent adult and seeing themselves as that. But it's just getting harder and harder to do so. Now, luckily for me, I scratched that itch when I bought rental properties at the age of 18. And although it was a profitable endeavor, I did not leave that home ownership experience unscathed. For me, in addition to the mortgage and the taxes and the insurance and the routine maintenance and the cable bills and all of these things that need to be tracked and paid on time and add up, there's a permanent mental space that your home takes up in your head that I felt when I lived in a home that I don't feel when I'm renting. I imagine it's similar to having a child. There's always something about it that needs attention. There's always something about it that needs to be fixed. It's always on your mind. And unlike a child, there's a lawn that needs to be mowed, a driveway that needs to be shoveled, and an aspect that needs to be improved. And I believe that is the big problem that no one talks about. You see, the mind can come up with a near infinite number of ways that things around the house could be better, more habitable, could be more beautiful. And there is no limit to the amount of money or time you can spend getting it to that point. And the yardstick for what a nice home is always moves. And so there's always this pressure to just invest more and invest more and invest more. Now, do not misunderstand me. There is nothing wrong with buying a house or being a homeowner. If you've bought a house and you love it, great. Maybe that aligns better with your values. But for me, here's a list of my values as it stands today. I value independence and freedom as an individual. I value integrity and character personally, abundance and security financially, personal growth, development, excellence, relationships and connection with other people, and contribution to society or making an impact. And so what does this have to do with rent versus buy in 2025? Well, for the same reason that we want to highlight values with every single client that we work with. You see, getting clear on your values can help you determine what financial decision you should make. And yes, even if it means ending up with less money because of that decision. And we'll come back to all this in a moment, but let me walk us through a scenario. Take someone who's in the mass affluent. Maybe they're around 30 years old. They've been an aggressive investor and career focused since they were 18. They've been making money, they've been saving, and they've been on this wealth building path for the last 12 years. Let's imagine they now have $500,000 saved, and they're adding $5,000 every month to their investments. We'll say they could reasonably expect to get an 8% rate on return on their investments over the long haul, and we'll assume that mortgage rates are around 4.5%. But let's say they have 2 choices, right? They can buy the $1 million house that comes with $5,000 in monthly running costs, and that's not an assumption, by the way, I'll show you the numbers in a second. Or they could rent a furnished apartment with the same size and the same amenities for $5,000 a month. Here's a listing for a property that I would consider. It's got green space in the backyard, it's got a body of water close by, it's got a garage to park the cars. And where I'm from, this is gonna cost you a little over $1 million. And so if I roll down to the calculations, here we are at our 20% down payment, we're gonna amortize it over 25 years, and the mortgage rate is 4.5%. And our mortgage payment's gonna be $4,560, and it's assuming that we are going to have these following monthly expenses when we add in the property tax and all these other things. So the amount is actually over $5,000. So let's just assume it's $5,000, we can get it cheaper somehow. Now here is a comparable apartment. It's $5,000, All the utilities are included. It comes with cable and internet and all these things. The square footage is actually larger than the house. It's close to the river. It's got indoor heated parking. It's got all the bells and whistles that I could possibly want. And so I'm just showing here that this apartment, for the same price or even less, has more square footage and actually is closer to the proximity of downtown and all these other things. Now, here's what we have to understand. In scenario one, this person must put $200,000 down and $20,000 towards closing costs, because up here in Canada, we want to have about 20% down on a house, and about 2% of the value of the home is going to get taken away by land transfer taxes, lawyer fees, all these sorts of things. And so now we'll say, because only 70,000 of this up here in Canada can come from tax-free and tax-advantaged first home down payment accounts, there's going to be some taxable gains on their investments to raise the other $130,000. Let's be generous and assume that of that $130,000, $30,000 is capital gains. 15,000 at a 50% inclusion rate with capital gains will get taxed at the highest marginal tax bracket because they have a high income. That would be $7,500 in taxes owing. However, they can rest assured that at least half of their monthly mortgage payment will go towards paying down their mortgage balance, not being burned like those idiot renters. Now, in addition to this, the value of their home will increase with inflation, or maybe let's even use the average growth rate in Canadian housing prices over the last 50 years. I've also asked ChatGPT to tell me how much it would cost to furnish a 2,500 square foot home with mid-tier furniture and decor. Mid-tier is not going to be good enough for my fiance. ChatGPT said it will cost $50,000 on the low end, so let's use that. Now, in scenario two, when renting, this person maintains all $500,000 in their investment account, which continues to grow at that compound rate of 8%. However, every $5,000 a month rent payment is effectively thrown out the window. So our total outflows here, when we rent, is $5,000 up front, and when we buy, it's $277,500 up front. And so this is what we get with our remaining investment balance. When we rent, we have $495,000 to invest, and when we buy, we have $222,500 to invest. Next, we have to discuss the regular upkeep, right? So it's generally accepted that maintenance and upkeep costs on a home are around 1% of the home's value per year. So in this scenario, on $1 million home, we're going to need $10,000 per year simply to just preserve the value of the home and not necessarily increase it. And this has to come from somewhere. And if you have productive financial habits in your savings, this likely means you're going to be able to save $10,000 less per year. Now, this is the nice part about renting. The upkeep is taken care of by the landlord, who typically benefits from economies of scale. You know, they have enough renters to profitably have an on-site maintenance person, whatever it might be. However, that has to be weighed against buying, where you end up with this massive pool of equity at the end when you've paid that mortgage off. So here we have routine maintenance. When you rent, it is $0 per year, and when you buy, it'll be $10,000 per year. Now, I feel like this provides us enough information to actually build out a base model and take a look. What I have is our time and our age. So this is the age of our person in question, the amount of years. We're gonna go down to the retirement age of 65. In this scenario, they get to invest $495,000 up front. Why? Because their closing costs were tiny. They only have to put up that first month's rent. And so their investments get to compound at 8% and grow and grow and grow. They're also adding money every single month. We've assumed they're adding $5,000 a month, which would be $60,000 a year, but we're gonna subtract $5,000 for the little decor, little updates you have to make. I'm just trying to be reasonable here. And so over time, what we find is this person ends up with $18 million. If they start with $500 and they add $55,000 a year, and they like their job enough that they're willing to wait to retire at 60, they're gonna end up with $18 million. Okay, let's move over to the buy scenario. In the buy scenario, we have the exact same thing, year and time and age, yet our balance this time is a little different because we had to put so much down. We have our investment base minus the down payment and closing costs and furniture and decor and the capital gains we may have had to pay to raise the funds. Now, we're gonna grow the investments at the same rate, and in this scenario, we're only gonna add $50,000 because we can save $5,000 a month, but we have to spend $10,000 every year in upkeep. But now we have a whole new set of data, which is the home, and we're gonna assume that that home increases at 2.8% per year, which is the average Canadian real estate appreciation over the last 50 years. We've also amortized their mortgage over 25 years so that by that time that 25th year comes around, they have no mortgage left. And one thing to also mention is I've assumed that once that mortgage is done being paid off, we take all of what was going towards the mortgage payments of $4,000 per month and adding it to the investments. In our rent scenario, we did not do that. We kept it at an even $55,000 the whole way through, whereas with the owner, we said, okay, once that mortgage is done, we're gonna funnel all that excess cash flow into investing to catch up. Also have their equity building, which is simply the value of the home minus the mortgage. That gives you your equity. We have the value of their investments compounding plus the equity in their home giving you their total wealth. And so what's really interesting is that if we look at the difference at the end or at any different year throughout the process, in one scenario, we end up with 16.25 million, and in the renting scenario, you end up with 18.9. And I've summarized these up here. Here's the difference when you rent versus buy in these circumstances. At age 40, you end up with a little less. At age 50, you end up with quite a bit more. And at age 65, you end up with even more by renting. So in this case, because we've reduced our base investment value and reduced the amount that we can add every single year to these investments that are compounding and growing, we actually end up worse off financially. In addition to that, all throughout the process, the renter got to maintain liquidity in their assets, whereas the buyer had a lot of their wealth over time, maybe as much as a third of it, tied up in the value of a home, which just means that it's illiquid, it's hard to get, and it's not growing as fast as the investments would. Now, I have no hidden agenda. I'm trying to steelman this. I've done that by assuming the following. Investments will only get 8% going forward, although the long-term average is actually higher. I'm assuming that home prices in Canada will continue to grow at their 50-year average growth rate, which is honestly difficult to imagine. I've assumed that the mortgage can be paid off over 25 years without interest rates going up or down or any variations. I've also assumed zero additions, no renovations, and not even any transactions relating to potentially moving different homes over time. I've assumed that the moment the house is paid off, all of that free cash flow goes towards saving. Now, my fiance and I have also discussed at length our favorite home designer, and we've priced out what the dream home would cost if we wanted to remodel with him. And shockingly, to get this designer to build and remodel the home in a way that we'd like it to be the dream home, it would cost us $300 to $400 per square foot. On a 2,500 square foot house, let's assume $300 per square foot. That's gonna mean $750,000 we're gonna put into the house. Now, let's amortize that $750,000 cost over the remainder of the 25-year mortgage. And here's what it looks like now. Now, our renting scenario is the exact same. We start with the same amount, it grows at the same rate, we add the same amount of money, nothing has changed here. We end up exactly with that number. However, now the housing one's a little more complicated. What I've done here is added this refinance column. So where do we get the money to make big home improvements? We can either do it from our investments, we can sell off assets, raise the money and pay it down in cash, or we could use some sort of home equity line of credit where we use the equity in our home to make that home improvement. And so here we have the same idea as before. We're starting with quite a bit less because we had larger closing costs. We're gonna add $50,000 a year, but at some point, the equity in our home becomes large enough that we can refinance that equity to make this improvement. And so in this year, we're going to add a whole chunk of money to the value of the home because we're putting $780,000 into the value of the house here, which is what this value would have been if we kept calculating. And the mortgage is also going to go up by $780. So we've increased our mortgage by $780, and we've increased the value of the home by $780. And that $780 will now grow at the 50-year average Canadian house increase. Now we end up with a way different value in our home. Instead of our home being worth $2.7 million at the end at age 65, now that home is worth almost $4 million. So that addition has increased the value of the home. Problem here is that if we want to pay this mortgage off over the same 25 period, we don't want to extend the mortgage, but we're going to add a whole bunch more. If we're going to add a whole bunch more onto this mortgage without extending the amortization, we don't want to have a mortgage when we're 70. So if we're going to keep the same amortization, but add $780,000 to it, that means it eliminates all of the money we had to invest because now we have to pay the debt service on that new loan amount. And so what we're imagining here is that we have 0, 0, 0. We're not contributing anything because we're putting so much money into doing this renovation on the house. Our house is worth a lot more. We didn't save as much, but again, at the time that house is paid off, we're gonna plunge all the remaining money into investments. What do we find? Well, what we find is that the total wealth is now 18 million versus 15.5 million. And in this scenario, same thing. At every single age, we end up wealthier by renting and investing the difference, investing what would have gone to down payments, investing what would have gone into home improvements, investing what would have gone into all these closing costs that we never get back. So if you accept that this model is somewhat accurate and you like the assumptions, it is clear that renting would be the better decision even financially. However, we really have to analyze those assumptions because if our assumptions aren't reasonable, then our conclusion isn't reasonable. So here's the point. When buying a house and comparing it to renting, you need to take into account the following things: the opportunity cost of removing the down payment amount from your investments that are growing faster. You have to take into account the evaporation of 2% of the home's value in closing costs from your investments that you'll never be seen again. The taxable gains you might have to trigger in your investments to buy that house furnishing and decor, which slowly declines in value to 0 over time, and the routine maintenance on the value of the home, which, as we've assumed, is about 1% of the home's value per year. But to me, the most worrisome part that no one gives enough credence to in my mind is the near infinite, never-ending laundry list of things that could be done to improve the home. Motivated by this human instinct to evolve and progress and have one sense of value and significance attached to a piece of land, all of which cost money. Well, now I want to go back and look at this decision through the frame of my values rather than through the frame of finances. And so as it stands today, my values are, first and foremost, freedom and independence, right? When renting, it's not complete freedom and independence because you don't have the freedom to change the kitchen. You're living in someone else's property. So maybe not a 10, but more like an 8. And that's because I get to keep all my capital. I can move whenever I want and I'm not attached to this property. Second, integrity and character. Well, I would actually say that as a person, renting means that you're in a more transient situation. You maybe lack community that you would have if you lived in a neighborhood. There's maybe less incentive to host because where are people gonna park and how are people gonna get there? It's just not as cozy as being in a home. And you need to constantly be justifying to people why you're renting and not buying. So maybe as far as the character and that sort of piece goes, we'll give that a 4 or a 5. Abundance and security. I'm gonna give this one an 8 because having more liquidity, having assets growing at higher rates, not having the unpredictability of unexpected events and costs, this just makes life more stable and more predictable and allows my investments to grow higher, maintain the liquidity, all those great things. As far as personal growth is concerned, renting probably gets, honestly, a 7. Now with renting, you absolutely have that freedom to invest time into other hobbies or things that you find meaningful, but the downside is you don't get to develop the skills and the habits needed to tend to a home. But that's a pretty narrow skill set. So I'm only gonna dock 3 points for it because I think you can really just invest in that personal growth elsewhere outside of just being a homeowner. Relationships and connections. Well, I would say that renting probably, in my experience, makes it a little trickier to host and a little less proud to have people over. So I'm gonna give this one a 4 because you're probably less incentivized to host people at your house. Contribution and impact. I might give this one a 5. On one hand, it gives you freedom of time to make more impact and contribution through your business. But on one hand, you don't really have a neighborhood, you don't really have roots down anywhere, and maybe you're not making as big of an impact or contribution in your immediate neighborhood. And when I tally all these up, we end up with a figure that is higher than 5. And for that reason, it appears that renting aligns more with my values and more with my money. Because for me, like freedom, it means 2 things financially. It means having a disproportionate amount of liquid assets to fixed assets. And it also means having a disproportionate amount of unstructured time to structured time. And so for all these reasons, I'm leaning towards renting an expensive place with all the bells and whistles, you know, a balcony, a hot tub, a sauna, cold plunge, indoor heated parking, near a park, near a river, over buying my own home, even if it means we never feel like we own it. And then I would probably continue to do so until the pain of not owning our own home exceeds the gains in the way of liquidity and freedom, if that makes sense. So what are your thoughts? What am I missing? Please, I'm trying to understand this. If you have better ideas of why I'm wrong, I would love to hear them. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.